This battle united Japan and played a huge role in history. In a misty valley squeezed between mountains, the fate of an entire nation was decided. It was not just two armies that clashed here, it was two worlds, two philosophies, two eras. On one side was a cold, calculating genius, ready to risk everything for the future. On the other was a samurai whose loyalty was as unyielding as his principles. This is not a story about swords and spears, but about the greatest chess game in Japanese history, where the pieces were armies numbering in the thousands, and the price of a mistake was the unity of the country. One wrong move, one delay, one betrayed word could change everything. The Battle of Sekigahara became the crucible in which a new world was forged, one that lasted for more than 2.5 centuries. This is the story of how the foggy morning of October 21st, 1600, determined the future of millions. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how a single cannon shot fired at his own allies decided the outcome of the greatest battle in samurai history and united all of Japan. I will reveal the best-kept secret. The Battle of Sekigahara was won long before the first battle cry was heard. While his opponent, Ishida Mitsunari, was gathering armies and developing flawless tactical plans, Tokugawa Ieyasu was waging a different war. It was a war of whispers, promises, and secret letters carried throughout the country by his spies. Ieyasu was a master of psychology. He understood that samurai loyalty had its price and that it was not always measured in gold. He offered some daimyo land, others high positions, and still others forgiveness for past mistakes. His emissaries worked around the clock, weaving a complex web of intrigue right in the enemy's camp. While Mitsunari relied on a sense of duty and loyalty to the late ruler Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Ieyasu appealed to ambition and fear. He knew that many daimyo in the Western coalition doubted their leader and feared the future. It was on these doubts that he built the foundation for his future victory. His spy network was unprecedented for its time, permeating the entire structure of the Western Army. Ieyasu knew about every move Mitsunari made, every decision he took, every dispute in his military council. He read his opponent like an open book, while remaining a complete mystery to him. This invisible information war gave Ieyasu a decisive advantage. He did not simply lead his army into battle, he led it to meet an enemy that was already internally broken and divided. He knew that Mitsunari's allies were in fact his pawns on the board. Mitsunari based his strategy on ideal conditions. On paper, his plan was brilliant. He lured Ieyasu's army into a perfect trap, surrounding it on all sides. But he did not take one thing into account. The walls of this trap were built of people whose hearts already belonged to his enemy. Ieyasu turned the battlefield into a theatrical stage, where each actor had their own role to play. Some had to fight, others had to wait, and still others had to strike from behind at the decisive moment. And he was the chief director of this deadly spectacle. He didn't just use betrayal, he made it his main weapon. He understood that in an era of change, old oaths of allegiance become fragile, and whoever could offer a more attractive future would get everything. This strategy required incredible composure and patience. For months, he waited for the seeds of doubt he had sown to sprout. And on that foggy morning at Sekigahara, he was ready to reap his harvest. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think of such a strategy, where victory is achieved not by force of arms, but by force of persuasion and intrigue? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Want to know a secret that will radically change your romanticized view of unwavering samurai loyalty and honor? On the eve of the decisive Battle of Sekigahara, on October 21st, 1600, Japan was divided into two huge warring camps. The Eastern Army under the iron leadership of the cunning Tokugawa Ieyasu, and the Western Army, nominally led by the idealist Ishida Mitsunari. But this split was not simply a geographical division along the cardinal points. It was a deeply ideological, philosophical confrontation between two visions of Japan's future. It was not a war of territories, but a war of ideas. Pragmatism versus idealism, the future versus the past, reality versus the dream of loyalty to a dead lord. Tokugawa's Eastern Army was a monolith, firmly united by the will and unquestionable authority of one man, the 58-year-old veteran Ieyasu. The vast majority of his daimyo were his longtime personal vassals, repeatedly tested in dozens of bloody battles over decades. They blindly trusted their cunning leader and sincerely believed in his specific promises of stability, peace, and economic order after half a century of civil wars. Ieyasu was not just a commander, but a father to his people. They knew he would not betray them because he only betrayed his enemies, while rewarding his own generously and fairly. Mitsunari's Western army, on the other hand, was more of a fragile coalition of diverse interests than a unified body with a common goal. Its formal nominal leader was the powerful and wealthy Daimyo Mori Terumoto, but the real ideological center and organizer was the brilliant administrator Ishida Mitsunari, a loyal servant of the late unifier of Japan. He passionately rallied to his banner all those who remained sincerely loyal to the legacy and memory of the late great Toyotomi Hideyoshi and feared the growing, unlimited ambitions of the cunning Tokugawa to seize power. But loyalty to the dead was a weak glue for the living, who had their own interests and ambitions. Mitsunari's critical problem was that his motley coalition was rife with dangerous internal contradictions and long-standing grudges. Many proud daimyo personally disliked him for his sharp, straightforward bureaucratic character and his civilian, rather than military, noble origins. He was an upstart in their eyes. They joined him not out of love or respect for his personality, but out of fear of Ieyasu's power or because of old personal grudges and blood feuds. An alliance based on fear and revenge is fragile. The first blow destroys it, exposing the lack of true unity of purpose. Ieyasu's disciplined army was governed by strict military discipline and a crystal-clear command hierarchy without any discrepancies. He was an absolute and unquestionable authority whose orders were not discussed or questioned even by the highest commanders. This gave him critical flexibility and the ability to quickly manage his forces as a single, obedient whole, responding to changes instantly. One mind controlled thousands of hands. The effectiveness of dictatorship in wartime is undeniable, while democracy is slow and argumentative when action must be taken without hesitation. In the chaotic camp of the Western Army, on the contrary, there were endless arguments and debates on every issue. All strategic decisions were made at protracted military councils, where each powerful and proud daimyo had his own stubborn opinion and defended it. This fatal disunity and lack of a single command became the Achilles heel of the entire coalition. While they were arguing about the plan, Ieyasu was already acting, seizing the initiative. A committee cannot command an army. War requires a single leader, not a council of equals, each of whom pulls the blanket over themselves. The pragmatic Ieyasu promised his supporters specific material things: the conquered lands of the defeated, high titles and positions, economic stability, and an end to wars. His program was extremely clear and pragmatic, without idealism. Money, land, power. He spoke convincingly about a bright future that could be built together after victory, painting a picture of prosperity. The promises were specific and understandable. Join us, we will win, you will receive a reward. You will live in peace. Lose, and you will lose everything. The idealist Mitsunari, on the other hand, appealed to the abstract past and duty, to loyalty to the late ruler Hideyoshi and his defenseless young son Hideyori as the legitimate heir. His moral motives were noble and pure, but for many weary daimyo, exhausted by half a century of endless bloody wars and instability, the concrete promises of the pragmatist Ieyasu sounded much more tempting than abstract appeals to honor. Honor does not feed a family, land does. Pragmatism triumphs over idealism when the survival of the clan and the well-being of descendants for centuries to come are at stake. Thus, it was not just two armies with spears that entered the foggy field of Sekigahara, but two diametrically different approaches to governing people and the state. On the one hand, there was a centralized, pragmatic, and purposeful force with a clear goal. On the other, a coalition fragmented into factions, idealistic and full of internal doubts and contradictions, without a single leader. Unity versus disunity, realism versus romanticism, the future versus the past. Which of these two models of governance seems more effective to you in the acute crisis situation of war, where every minute counts. In the next chapter, we will delve deeply into the complex personality of Ishida Mitsunari, a brilliant administrator and fanatically loyal vassal. To understand why this brilliant organizer and honest idealist suffered a crushing historical defeat that changed the fate of Japan for 250 years of the Tokugawa shogunate. Here's what happens behind the closed doors of history. Traditional historiography often portrays Ishida Mitsunari as an arrogant bureaucrat and inept military commander. But this is only half the story. To truly understand the deeper meaning of the Battle of Sekigahara, one must first understand the personal tragedy of this complex man, torn between duty and reality. He was not a warrior with a sword, born for the battlefield, but a brilliant administrator and logistician who, until his last breath, desperately tried to preserve the fragile peace and order built by his beloved Lord Hideyoshi. Mitsunari was an architect trying to protect a building when everyone around him was already tearing it down brick by brick for their own needs. A noble but doomed mission in a world where ideals had died along with the creator of a unified Japan. Mitsunari was not a natural charismatic daimyo leader who inspired the masses. He was the ideal, effective second-in-command, the executor of someone else's will. His unique talents for calculation and organization were revealed in the quiet of his office with papers, where he masterfully managed the complex economy and logistics of a huge country of 60 provinces. He was an inconspicuous but critically important person who ensured the smooth operation of Hideyoshi's gigantic military machine. The army was fed, supplied, and moved thanks to his calculations. Without him, the armies would have starved to death before they even met the enemy. Logistics wins wars invisibly but inevitably, and Mitsunari was a master of this art. His main defining character trait was his unwavering, almost religiously fanatical loyalty to his lord and his word. He solemnly made a sacred oath to the dying Hideyoshi on his deathbed to protect his young son Hideyori and his political legacy of unification at any cost. And he uncompromisingly placed this oath above his own ambitions and career, above cynical common sense, and even above his own life and the well-being of his family. The oath was absolute and non-negotiable. To break it would mean betraying himself, his identity as a samurai for whom his word was his life. It was this unconditional loyalty to his ideal that made him fatally vulnerable in a world of betrayal. He sincerely believed that other daimyo shared his deep sense of duty and honor to the memory of Hideyoshi. He simply could not psychologically understand how it was possible to cynically betray a sacred oath for personal material gain. It was beyond his understanding of morality. And this naive idealism in a world of cynics cost him absolutely everything: his army, his victory, his life. He played chess, believing that the pieces would move according to the rules of honor, not knowing that his opponent had already bribed half of his pieces with golden promises. Mitsunari was a man of strict principles and morals in a cynical era when principles became a commodity in the marketplace of power. He was straightforward to the point of rudeness and honest to the point of naivety, where political cunning and skillful flattery were objectively required for manipulation. His sharpness of judgment and categorical inability to compromise and bargain alienated many potential allies who could have tipped the scales. He did not know how to flatter or lie, a fatal flaw for a politician where truth is a luxury and lies are a tool for survival and influence. He was a brilliant strategist on paper with maps and chips. His detailed plan to lure Tokugawa's army into a trap in the narrow valley of Sekigahara was tactically flawless from a military point of view. He masterfully used all the natural advantages of the mountainous terrain, creating ideal conditions for encircling and completely destroying the numerically superior enemy with fire from the heights. On paper, everything was perfect, a classic cauldron from which there was no escape if the flanks held and attacked simultaneously on signal. But he fatally overlooked the critical human factor: betrayal and greed. He placed daimyo, whose personal loyalty he was not entirely sure of, in key strategic positions on the flanks, but hoped for their honor. He naively trusted those commanders who were already secretly negotiating with the agents of the cunning Ieyasu to switch sides for a generous reward. The plan was perfect, but it was based on the false assumption of loyalty. a beautiful theory shattered by the dirty reality of human nature, where gold is stronger than honor for most people. Tokugawa Ieyasu was his complete opposite in everything, the yin and yang of politics. A pragmatist and cynic to the core, he coldly viewed people as pieces on a shogi board, soberly assessing their strengths and weaknesses, their price and usefulness. Mitsunari, on the other hand, romantically saw them as noble comrades bound by a sacred oath in honor, and was cruelly and catastrophically mistaken in this assessment. One saw tools, the other saw brothers in arms. One was right, the other was noble. But war rewards the right, not the noble, mercilessly punishing idealism with death. His crushing defeat was not a defeat of military tactics or strategy on the battlefield, but a defeat of an entire worldview and philosophy. His ideal world, built on abstract concepts of honor, duty, and loyalty to one's word, collapsed irrevocably under the crushing onslaught of a new cynical world, where the rules were dictated by cold pragmatism and personal material gain. Old Japan died with Hideyoshi, and a new one was born in the blood of Sekigahara. Mitsunari did not understand that he was defending a corpse, not a living organism. In some profound sense, Ishida Mitsunari was the last true samurai of the irretrievably fading romantic era of wars. He lost tragically not because he was stupid or incompetent in military affairs, but because he was too devoted to lofty ideals that the cynical majority had long since abandoned for the sake of survival. And this is precisely where his deeply personal tragedy lies, and the key to understanding the entire battle. It was not a clash of armies, but of eras where the past fought heroically against the future and inevitably lost, because time cannot be stopped with a sword, no matter how sharp it may be. What if I showed you a time machine? Imagine a narrow valley surrounded on three sides by hills, through which runs the main road connecting eastern and western Japan. This is Sekigahara. It was here that Ishida Mitsunari decided to give the decisive battle, and his choice was brilliant. The terrain was ideal for his plan. He intended to let Tokugawa's army into the valley and then attack it from the flanks and rear, closing the trap. From a military point of view, it was an almost perfect defensive position. Mitsunari took up position with his main forces on Mount Sasao, which offered a perfect view of the entire valley. This was his command post, allowing him to control the course of the entire battle. He could see every maneuver of the enemy. He positioned his most powerful allies on the hills surrounding the valley. On Mount Matsuoka, towering over the eastern flank of Ieyasu's army, stood Kobayakawa Hideaki's 15,000-strong army. It was this army that would play a decisive role in the coming battle. On other sides, the valley was blocked by the forces of the Mori, Yosokabe, and many other clans. Overall, the Western armies significantly outnumbered the Eastern army and occupied the dominant heights. On paper, Tokugawa did not stand a chance. When Ieyasu approached Sekigahara, he understood perfectly well that he had fallen into a trap. He saw enemy banners on all the surrounding hills, but he had no choice. Retreat would mean losing the initiative and, most likely, a war of attrition that he might not win. He deliberately walked into this trap because his plan was based not on tactics, but on betrayal. He knew that the walls of this perfect mousetrap were ready to collapse at his signal. Geography was on Mitsunari's side, but psychology was on Ieyasu's. The foggy morning of October 21st only added to the tension. The opponents stood a few hundred meters apart, but because of the thick fog, they couldn't see each other. It was an ominous silence before the storm that would decide the fate of the country. The position chosen by Mitsunari was both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. It gave him a huge tactical advantage, but at the same time, it depended entirely on the coordinated actions and loyalty of his allies. And it was precisely this dependence that Tokugawa intended to exploit. Thus, the Sekigahara Valley became not just a battlefield, but a giant stage for a drama of betrayal. Every hill and every stream in this valley witnessed the collapse of the old world. But how did the armies end up at this point? In the next chapter, you will learn about the rapid maneuvers that led the two great armies to their final rendezvous. The story of the Battle of Sekigahara began not in the valley itself, but hundreds of kilometers away. Throughout the summer of 1600, both sides played a complex game, trying to seize the strategic initiative. It was a rapid march where speed and correct decisions meant everything. Initially, Ieyasu planned to strike the Wasugi clan in northern Japan. He led his main army there, leaving only small garrisons in the central region. It was this that Ishida Mitsunari took advantage of, announcing the creation of the Western Coalition and commencing hostilities. Mitsunari's first target was Fushimi Castle, which was defended by Ieyasu's loyal vassal, Tori Mototada. The heroic defense of the castle delayed the advance of the Western army for 11 days. These 11 days gave Tokugawa precious time to turn around and face the new threat. Upon receiving news of Mitsunari's actions, Ieyasu immediately halted his northern campaign. He gathered his daimyo for a council of war in the city of Oyama, where he delivered his famous speech. He gave his commanders a choice, to go with him to the west or to stay and defend their lands, and they unanimously supported him. Tokugawa's army split into two parts. The main force, under his personal command, moved along the coastal Tokaido Road. The second, 38,000-strong army, commanded by his son Hidetada, took the mountainous Nakasendo Road to strike from another direction. However, Hidetada's army made a fatal mistake. It became embroiled in a protracted and unnecessary siege of Ueda Castle, which was defended by the Sanada clan. As a result of these actions, Hidetada's army was late for the decisive battle, and Ieyasu had to fight without almost 40,000 of his soldiers. Meanwhile, Mitsunari, having captured several key castles, was moving towards Ieyasu. His goal was Ogaki Castle, which he made his temporary headquarters. It was from here that he planned to command his forces. Ieyasu acted swiftly and decisively. He arrived in the combat zone and immediately began to put pressure on the enemy. Using misinformation, he made Mitsunari believe that he was going to attack Ogaki and forced him to move his army to what Mitsunari thought was a more advantageous position in the Sekigahara Valley. Thus, as a result of a series of rapid marches, counter-marches, sieges, and strategic maneuvers, the two armies converged at a single point. Each commander believed he had lured the other into a trap, but only one of them knew what would happen next. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The dawn of October 21st, 1600, was cold and damp. A thick fog enveloped the Sekigahara Valley, hiding the armies from each other. This natural veil created incredible tension. Hundreds of thousands of warriors stood at full battle readiness, listening to the silence and waiting for the signal. Ieyasu was the first to lose his patience. At around 8 a.m., when the fog began to lift, he ordered his vanguard, commanded by Ii Naomasa and Matsudaira Tadayoshi, to attack. This move was a violation of the prior agreements, but Ieyasu needed to start the battle on his own terms. The vanguard of the Eastern Army crashed into the ranks of the Yukita clan, one of the most combat-ready in the Western Coalition. A fierce battle ensued. Despite the suddenness of the attack, the Yukita warriors held their ground, and the battle became protracted from the very beginning. Other units then joined the battle. The entire valley was engulfed in battle. On the left flank of the Western Army, the forces of Ishida Mitsunari, Konishi Yukinaga, and Shimazu Yoshihiro successfully repelled all enemy attacks. Mitsunari's positions on Mount Sasao were virtually impregnable. Moreover, the Western Army began to press the enemy. Large detachments under the command of Otani Yoshitsugu attacked the flank of the Eastern forces, creating a critical situation. In the first hours of the battle, it seemed that Mitsunari's tactical plan was working flawlessly. Tokugawa's army was trapped in the valley. It suffered losses and was unable to break through the enemy's defenses. From the hills, thousands of troops from Mori and Kobayakawa, who had not yet entered the battle, watched the course of the battle, ready to deliver the decisive blow at any moment. Ieyasu was in his headquarters, watching the battle with concern. He saw that his army was in a difficult position. A critical moment had arrived. If Mitsunari's allies struck now, the Eastern Army would be doomed. But the strike did not come. Kobayakawa Hideaki on Mount Matsuo and Mori Hidemoto on Mount Nangu remained in place, not moving from their positions. They waited, watching to see who would take the initiative. And this delay cost the Western Army the victory. Mitsunari sent messengers again and again with orders to attack, but there was no response. His perfect plan began to unravel due to the indecision and secret agreements of his allies. The battle reached a bloody stalemate, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. How can you force an ally to attack if they refuse to follow orders? In the next chapter, you will learn about the ingenious and cruel psychological move that Ieyasu made to set off a chain reaction of betrayal. The battle reached its climax. Tokugawa's army was bogged down in the center of the valley, and the scales were tipping dangerously. It was at this moment that Ieyasu made a decision that went down in history textbooks as a model of cold calculation and military cunning. He saw that Kobayakawa Hideaki, who occupied a key position on Mount Matsuo, was still not moving. The young daimyo was hesitating, not knowing whose side to take. Ieyasu, who had a secret agreement with him, was beginning to lose patience. Then he gave one of the strangest orders in the history of warfare. He ordered his arquebusiers to turn their weapons toward Mount Matsuo and fire not at the enemy, but at the positions of Kobayakawa's indecisive ally. It was an unambiguous signal. The bullets flying over the heads of Kobayakawa's soldiers were the final argument. Ieyasu was saying, "Decide now, or you will become my next enemy." This psychological blow proved more effective than any order. For Kobayakawa Hideaki, it was the moment of truth. Fearing Tokugawa's wrath and realizing that further delay was pointless, he gave the order to his 15,000-strong army. But he did not order an attack on the Eastern Army in the valley, but on the positions of his own ally, Otani Yoshitsugu. This maneuver took the Western Army completely by surprise. Otani Yoshitsugu, one of Mitsunari's most loyal and talented commanders, had anticipated the possibility of betrayal and kept reserves at the ready. But the blow of Kobayakawa's fresh forces against the unprotected flank was too strong. Kobayakawa's attack was the stone that started the avalanche. His betrayal served as a signal to other daimyo who were also conducting secret negotiations with Ieyasu. One after another, they began to switch sides to Tokugawa or simply leave the battlefield. The positions of the Western Army, which had seemed unshakable just a minute ago, began to crumble. The blow from behind from one of their main allies broke the soldiers' fighting spirit. What had begun as a tactically calculated battle turned into chaos. Otani Yoshitsugu, realizing that the battle was lost, committed ritual suicide. His troops were crushed and scattered. Now the way to Ishida Mitsunari's headquarters was open. Thus, a single cannon volley, aimed not at the enemy but at a wavering ally, decided the outcome of the battle. Ieyasu did not wait for the betrayal to mature on its own. He forced it to happen by force. It was a risky but ingenious move that brought him victory. Kobayakawa's betrayal was the spark that ignited the powder keg. As soon as his soldiers rushed down from Mount Matsuo, a chain reaction swept through the entire Western Army. The daimyo, who had been waiting on the sidelines until then, realized that the game was over and rushed to join the victor. Following Kobayakawa, other commanders whose troops were stationed on the flanks also defected to Tokugawa. Wakizaka Yasuharu, Kutsuki Mototsuna, Ogawa Suketada, and Akaza Nayasu, commanding a total of several thousand soldiers, turned their spears against their former allies. Their attack completed the defeat of the center of the Western Army. The troops of Ukita Hidae and Konishi Yukinaga, who had fought valiantly since morning, found themselves attacked on three sides. Their ranks became mixed and organized resistance ceased. The soldiers, seeing the betrayal of their commanders, began to retreat in panic. The only one who retained his honor to the end and tried to turn the tide of the battle was Shimazu Yoshihiro, head of a powerful clan from southern Japan. He waited until the last moment for orders from Mitsunari, but never entered the battle. When he saw the general retreat, he made a bold decision. Instead of retreating, he ordered his 1,500 warriors to attack straight ahead, through the very center of Tokugawa's army of many thousands. It was a desperate, almost suicidal breakthrough aimed at reaching Ieyasu's headquarters. This maneuver, which went down in history as the Shimazu frontal breakthrough, became one of the most memorable episodes of the battle. Breaking through enemy lines, Shimazu's samurai inflicted enormous damage on the enemy, but also suffered heavy losses themselves. Only a few dozen men returned home from this breakthrough. Meanwhile, on Mount Nangu, the huge army of the Mori clan, numbering more than 16,000 men, remained stationary. Their commander, Kikawada Hiroi, who had also made a secret agreement with Ieyasu, blocked all routes for attack. He simply did not allow the Allies to engage in battle, declaring that it was time for lunch. Thus, due to a series of betrayals and inaction by the Allies, the huge Western Army, which had numerical and positional advantages, collapsed in just a couple of hours. Ishida Mitsunari's perfect plan was shattered by human nature. By midday, the battle was effectively over. The Western Army ceased to exist as a unified force. The pursuit of scattered groups began, and Ishida Mitsunari was forced to flee the battlefield. Tokugawa's victory was complete and unconditional. He won the battle not so much with his sword as with his words and gold. The field at Sekigahara was the final act in the drama of the unification of Japan. After the dust settled on the battlefield, the results began to be tallied. The victory of the Eastern Army was absolute, and now Tokugawa Ieyasu became the absolute ruler of Japan. The fate of the leaders of the Western coalition was sealed. Ishida Mitsunari, who had been hiding in the mountains for several days, was captured and taken to Kyoto. Together with other leaders of the rebellion, Konishi Yukinaga and Ankokuji Ike, he was paraded through the streets of the capital. Their execution became a public symbol of the end of the war. Tokugawa proved himself to be a wise politician. He generously rewarded the daimyo, who had switched sides during the battle, even though he did not fully trust them. Betrayal was useful, but it did not command respect. The daimyo who fought against him but survived faced different fates. The most powerful and irreconcilable, such as the Wasugi clan, were stripped of most of their lands. Their holdings were reduced to a minimum so that they could never again pose a threat. The Mori clan, which never entered the battle, also suffered severe punishment. Despite the secret agreements of their commander, Kikawa Hiroi, Ieyasu did not forgive them for the very fact of joining the Western Army. Their vast holdings were confiscated, leaving them with only 2 provinces. A special fate awaited the Shimazu clan. Despite fighting against Tokugawa until the very end, Ieyasu allowed them to keep their lands. He was impressed by their bravery and understood that a war with this powerful clan on their home island of Kyushu would be too long and bloody. 3 years after the battle, in 1603, the emperor granted Tokugawa Ieyasu the highest military title of shogun. This marked the beginning of a new era, the Tokugawa shogunate, which was destined to rule Japan for the next 268 years. The Battle of Sekigahara was not just another feudal skirmish, it was an event that drew a line under an entire era. The era of the Warring States, which had lasted for more than 100 years. Tokugawa's victory put an end to chaos and civil strife and paved the way for long-awaited peace. The main legacy of the battle was the final unification of Japan under a single, strong central authority. Ieyasu and his descendants created a harsh but effective system of government that brought the country an unprecedented period of peace and stability. This era went down in history as the Edo period. After the battle, Tokugawa changed the very essence of the samurai class. From warriors constantly fighting for land and glory, they became officials and administrators. The sword became more of a status symbol than an everyday tool. A strict social hierarchy was introduced, where each class, samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants, had its own clearly defined place. This system, based on Confucian principles, was designed to prevent any social upheaval. To control the daimyo and prevent new uprisings, Ieyasu introduced the Sankin Kotai system. Each daimyo was required to spend 1 year in the new capital of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, and the other year in his own domain. At the same time, their families remained in Edo as hostages. This system not only ensured political stability, but also contributed to economic and cultural development. The constant travels of the daimyo and their retinues to the capital led to the development of roads, infrastructure, and trade. A single national market emerged. The Edo period became a golden age for Japanese culture. In conditions of peace, kabuki theater, haiku poetry, and ukiyo-e printmaking flourished. The literacy rate among the population was one of the highest in the world. One of the key decisions of the Tokugawa shogunate was the policy of self-isolation, or sakoku. Fearing foreign influence, the government virtually closed the country to the outside world for more than 2 centuries. This had both positive and negative consequences for Japan's development. We can see that the Battle of Sekigahara was not just a battle, but the culmination of a complex political game played by the brilliant strategist Tokugawa Ieyasu. He turned the weakness of his position into strength and the strengths of his enemy into their main vulnerabilities. His victory was a triumph of calculation, patience, and a deep understanding of psychology. This battle became a watershed moment in Japanese history. It ended a century of chaos and opened the door to an era of long peace and prosperity. The legacy of Sekigahara is a reminder that sometimes it takes not only the power of weapons to unite a nation, but also the will of one person who can see several moves ahead. Do you think Tokugawa's methods based on intrigue and betrayal can be justified for the sake of achieving the great goal of uniting the country and ending the war? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories about the great battles that change the world.